Greetings. Welcome to ITR Live. I'm your host, Chris Hagenow, and we are back here in Studio 130 for another fun-filled, action-packed episode of Iowa's favorite conservative podcast. It's Election Day, John.
It is.
Are you excited?
I am, yeah.
Good. So if it's Tuesday, it's Election Day somewhere, and
Yes.
It is our turn here in Iowa for local elections today. So have you been out to vote yet today?
Yes. In fact, I was the first voter of my precinct.
Voter number one.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's. Have you ever been voter number one before?
I think this is my first time.
Really? And this
Yeah.
isn't just one precinct. It was the one you were telling me.
Yeah, there was at least 5 or 6 different ballots.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I suppose, look, local elections, lower turnout. But, yeah, I remember my dad when I was a little kid. He'd get up and he'd be there first one in the morning on his way to work, and there him about 3 or 4 other guys always fight to see who could be
Yes,
number one.
yeah.
But he'd be lined up because he had to get
Yeah.
to work. You know, I
Yeah.
mean, it wasn't messing around. But he never missed it, and
Yeah.
he was always going to be there. So
I've always gone at 7 o'clock, but I've never been the first to put my ballot actually in the machine.
well, there weren't a lot of questions on the ballot.
No.
I think you probably had.
I had there was 2 city council races, and then school board, and then 2 kind of
Yeah.
2 school fiscal bond issues.
Yeah,
that
I
were
think
on
my
the ballot.
Dallas County ballot will look close to the same, kind of the Waukee School Board election. So, I mean, let's just real quick before we dive into a bunch of other stuff today. This is going to be an election day kind of raw politics
Yeah.
podcast. We are going to spare our listeners from taxes and bonding. Well, we're going to talk about bonding because it's on the ballot, but this is going to be campaigns and elections
That's
today.
right.
So
Yeah.
anyway, so in the off years, so not the odd numbered years in Iowa, we now have local elections. And those have been combined over the years. So it used to be this November on the odd year was just your city council, your city races. A few years back, the legislature, combined the school board races into that. And then this is now the first year that all of the bond elections. Now you have November-only bond elections. So this is the first time around for really what is now the bigger, all-together local election day. John, I think you agree that's a good thing for voter participation?
I would agree. I think it is. And I think it hopefully will bring out more participation and at least bring more awareness, especially on the
Right.
bond front.
It'll make your being voter number one that much more impressive.
Yes. Yeah.
When all those voters are
Yeah,
there too. So, okay. So, what are the high, I want to get into what are the high profile elections today. So if we've got city, county, school, I think at least now, look, we're in central Iowa, so we have a very Des Moines, Polk County centric view of the news. But you and I both
Yes.
watch the news around the state.
Yeah.
It seems that the biggest race at the city level is the Des Moines mayor's race. Is that
I would agree. Yeah.
okay? And I think there's multiple people in that race, but it seems that it's going to come down to Josh Mandelbaum and Connie Boesen, who are both currently on the Des Moines City Council, both Democrats.
Yes.
And you're a KCCI aficionado. You're getting
Yeah.
the same ads that
Yes,
I am.
yeah.
Like, what's your sense? What are voters in Des Moines being asked to consider when they pick, presumably between Josh Mandelbaum and Connie Boesen?
That's a good question because I was thinking about that last night as I saw ads for both Josh and Connie, and it's interesting because the only ad, and I don't know if he has more than this ad, but Josh, the only ad I have seen is basically on abortion and basically criticizing the heartbeat bill and basically saying he was the individual on the council to basically defend abortion rights. Connie Boesen has a different ad that also mentions that she's supported by pro-choice groups, but then she says she has a plan for Des Moines, but there's no specifics of what that plan is. So I don't really, from their ads, you don't really get a sense of what each of them stand for, and it seems like they're playing for the liberal base, and maybe that's just the constituency of Des Moines proper.
Yeah. It's interesting, John, and I'm going to try and draw a couple thoughts together. they are both Connie Boesen and Josh Mandelbaum are both proud Democrats, and Des Moines is a overwhelming Democrat city. But there are still Republicans. In fact, I mean, probably at least a third of them are Republicans that are going to vote. It'll be interesting to see what impact that has. But you're right. It's a play to the base, and the base of the Democrat Party in Des Moines isn't the base that existed even 10 years ago, 15 years ago. You have a book there that you've been reading, I think kind of speaks to that a little
Absolutely,
bit, is maybe why a Des Moines mayoral's race being litigated over abortion, which has no bearing. A mayor doesn't have anything to say about that, as opposed to police and fire and fixing the roads and all of that. But what you want to talk about that book real quick, and then we'll come back around to what else is on the ballot?
This was just published either late last week or this week, but it's called "Where Have All the Democrats Gone? The Soul of the Party in the Age of Extremes" by John Judas and Roy Teixeira. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right.
I'll have to look at it. Teixeira, maybe?
Teixeira?
I don't know.
Yeah,
we'll see.
But, I just started it, but it's actually both are liberal.
Yeah.
But basically, they're arguing that the Democratic Party is, in a sense, in a mode of crisis because, as you were kind of saying, it has shifted so far to the left, and so the traditional New Deal base that consisted of more moderate blue-collar folks, they have sort of bolted and have becoming more Republican in recent election cycles because, for example, they in the first chapter, it's very interesting. They interview a gentleman from Michigan who was a lifelong Democrat, but they ask him, why are you now a Republican? He basically says the Democratic Party is now basically a globalist party, and he said Republicans are more nationalists. And then the other, so there's that issue in play, and then the other issue they point to is how extreme the Democrats have become on social issues that have driven people into the Republican camp, and so it's sort of breaking up the old Democratic Party.
Well, I think it's fascinating that as we decry Democrats running for mayor for litigating it on abortion, you bring that around to trade policy, which I'm impressed by. But but more than that, it shows you, and it's why these candidates are trying to see who can outflank each other on social issues, and they have to have data. These are well-funded campaigns on TV. They have data that shows that this issue is what the folks that live south of Grand are voting on. Yeah. So it's strange. And where I want to come around a little bit to some of what's going on around the country, and we can kind of maybe revisit that. But moving on, it seems to me from a more ideological battle, I guess, in these local elections is the ongoing fight over school boards.
Yes,
and that seems to me where a lot of the interest in action is, where you're seeing parties getting involved, or at least activists within the parties on each side, some interest groups, and that's all across, I think, the state, especially in these suburban areas.
Yeah, you're right.
Where, I think I live in the Waukee School District. You do too, I believe. And there we had a big battle in which the progressive candidates won last time. That's again fought again this time. I don't know what'll happen. There's other some areas where the conservative candidates or the pro-parent candidate did very well, which was places like Johnston and Ankeny. Yeah. And I think that's, again, looks like those are being very toughly fought, but looks good on, I think, in those districts. So that's really interesting to see is what direction these school board races, they get way more attention than they used to.
Yeah.
And I think that's the benefit, John, of we come back to November only, is it just helps to get people energized and out to vote.
Yeah.
So
and I've noticed too that there's and I can't speak for all districts, but I know there's been more people taking an interest in the school board, which is good. Yeah. And certainly the cultural war has come. Yeah. It's being fought in these elections.
Well, it used to be that the school board races, the only organized effort was the education establishment. So you'd see teachers unions and related forces getting involved to get their folks elected to school boards. And it makes sense. But there's much more energy and focus and organization on the conservative end of that now than there used to be. So, which, look, even if whatever side of that you're on, I think it's good that more people are trying to get involved in the process.
Yeah.
What we have organizationally, John, have done a lot of work on is some of these bond elections. And I want to make sure that we touch on that before we move on. Do you have any thoughts on some of these bond questions around the state?
Well, I had an email this morning from someone out of state just asking me what was on the ballot in Iowa, and so one thing that's interesting is I said there's a lot of bond questions that are going to be decided for whether it's the Des Moines airport or schools or jails, depending on what it is, and so. I think it's a tremendous price tag on that. I forgot our colleague Sarah Carey has kind of dug into that, and I can't remember what.
I think it's north
7
for the
whole state.
Oh, the whole state I think is 1.7
okay,
billion.
yeah,
and that's just for the new. That's not even the revenue per the statements. That's just new bonds.
Bonding, yeah. So it's a huge price tag, and I've actually noticed this time around, the number of people that have emailed me asking for input on this, and so this is starting to resonate with Iowans, and so maybe in the past where people have not maybe paid so much attention, now they are, and I think that's because property taxes are such a big concern for Iowans.
I think that's right. I have a couple of thoughts on that. Obviously, people are increasingly sensitive to things that impact their property tax bill. I think that, again, November only, having these on November when people are paying attention politically, this is not, the third Tuesday in February and trying to plan it into a snowstorm so nobody shows up or pays attention, right? People know, okay, it's election day. What am I looking for? So I think that matters. And I also think, too, this organization, John, the work that we're doing and our friends also around the state are doing a better job of elevating these issues. And so people are just aware that they're happening. So I think those are all good things. And that is not to say that this is raising up an army of no votes on these questions. I fully expect that many of these questions will pass around the state. The biggest one is the Polk County, or it's a Polk County question, but it's for the Des Moines airport. I mean, if we're going to prediction time, I think that will pass by a wide margin. I think when people can actually identify that they're getting a real piece of infrastructure that they know they need, they're much more likely to vote for it. And I'm not encouraging folks one way or the other in that particular question. We have not taken a position on that, John, but it really is a matter of it shouldn't raise your property taxes, and it's a question of who pays and at what interest rate. So the ongoing revenue from the airport should pay for that, and if they use their own bonding authority, then they use their own bonding authority to be at a higher interest rate. So they're building the project either way. Let's try and do it in the most cost-effective way possible. But I get it. It's a big price tag, and you are actually on the hook for it, Polk County property taxpayer. So when you and I go use the airport, we get a free ride.
That's right.
Yeah, so I like that. There's a few other big ones. There's the Waukee bond issues. Schools, especially in Waukee, have a history of passing by wide margins, and they need buildings. Cedar Rapids School is one, though, that I think would be interesting to see if people want to do that, because that's not quite as clear that they they need that, and at that price tag, that's $180 million, maybe over 200 somewhere. That's a big price tag too. Close some schools, build some new ones, and reorganize. I'll be interested to see what happens over in Cedar Rapids. We've talked about this a little bit, John, but I've been impressed with some of the jail bond elections. Is that the folks that are trying to get their a new local jail have really done a good job of trying to get out early and communicate with the public. And that's something that we want to see happen, is okay, if you're going to do this, you need to take it to the voters and be honest with them about what the cost is,
That's
what
right.
they're getting, and whether you need it or not. And then if the fully informed voters make a decision, then that's on them. And they decide they need it. I know KCCI.
Yes,
It was, I think was it Webster County?
Yeah,
They,
yes, yeah.
And they had very clear messaging and had the media out, and like kudos to those folks that did it that way up there. Some of the ones, though, it's going to be fun to watch, and maybe we'll get Sarah in to talk about it, too, someday. We're going to be following these and hopefully get some data about what happens tomorrow and in the weeks to come, is some of these small rural schools with declining enrollment that have had to keep raising property taxes are now asking their voters to bond for new construction.
Yeah.
And that's, I'll be interested to see, okay, are you really mad about your property taxes or just a little bit mad as long as you still get to keep building new stuff at the school?
Yeah. Because it's been a while since I've seen poll numbers, but people still have a strong connection with their local schools. I mean, the last poll I've seen on that in terms of Iowa, so it's interesting to see how that dynamic will play out between the overall concern with property taxes, but also the support for their public school.
Yeah.
And so that'll be an interesting dynamic.
Some of these schools, I think the cities tend to do it too. And this is the part that really frustrates me. And I'm trying to, I think going forward in the future, we need to find a way to message this, John, but is that there's an existing bond and the payments for the bond, and that comes due and it's done. And so the property taxpayers in that district would see a reduction in their property taxes because they're no longer making payments on the existing bond. But the school or whatever local government it is decides, okay, now we have the opportunity to go get a new bond. And so, okay, we have a $1.50 per thousand that's dropping off of the tax rolls. We should go back and do that again and see what we can get. And then they just build a wish list.
Yes. Yep.
And what projects can we fit into this new bond that we're going to issue for the exact same price? Then they print their marketing materials that said, well, this is tax neutral. This isn't a tax. We've seen that a lot.
Yeah.
And that's, I don't know if deceptive is the right word, but it is very disingenuous.
Yes.
To try and say that this doesn't cost them, because they are staring a property tax cut in the face. And they're being told, and yet, oh no, it's no tax increase.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that I think that's problematic, and I haven't talked to a lot of people, but certainly the folks I've talked to have been concerned about that type of language being used by advocates of some of these bond proposals.
Yep. Okay. Well, we got to move on a little bit. I just had this a tweet sent to me because it's relevant at the time, John, from Polk County Auditor Jamie Fitzgerald, saying that so far at this point today, there's a 36% increase in turnout in Polk County compared to 2 years ago for their local elections.
Wow.
So today seems to be really strong turnout.
Yeah.
I suspect that is the Des Moines mayor's race and the bond for the airport, but we'll see. So strong turnout today, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
That's what we want to see. Okay. Next issue, John, is, well, let's talk about this. It's not just Iowa. There's other places around the country that have some things on the ballot. There are a handful of states that elect their legislatures and their governors on the odd years. Kentucky, Virginia, I think New Jersey, might be one more, but those are the big ones. But do you want to follow this stuff? You talk to a lot of folks from around the country. What?
I mean, I think the big one has been Kentucky. Also, a lot of the national media is on Virginia as well, because I think a lot of the liberals would like to see Youngkin stumble, at least, or have the Republicans stumble in Virginia, because there's an assumption that with Youngkin's victory a few years ago that basically, he could turn Virginia more red or more Republican. Well, whether that's true or not,
I'm interested in that one too.
Yeah.
So Republican Governor Glenn Youngkin has Democrat legislature. I don't think it's necessarily a foregone conclusion that Democrats will hold. I think there is some thought that Republicans at least have a shot at winning the majority in the Virginia Assembly. But I'm not real close to that. So that's one to watch, I
Yeah.
think, is do they pick up seats? Do they lose seats? The Kentucky governor's race, I thought that was going to come into focus a little more than it has. I know Republicans were really high on, is it Cameron, the attorney general,
Yes,
who's the
yeah.
Republican nominee? I remember hearing Governor Reynolds talking about him in the past as chair in RGA. She's kind of responsible for these things. Oddly, as red as Kentucky is, they have a Democrat governor.
Yes.
And Bashir, who is, I think, still fairly popular for whatever reason. But I don't know if that's come around or not, but we'll just have to see on that. There's also a couple of ballot questions on abortion around the country. Ohio and somebody else, I think, has one on the ballot, constitutional amendments or referendum, and those have not gone well over the last few years.
That'll be interesting to see. And the other one I personally am going to be watching is the I think it's Proposition HH in Colorado.
Oh yeah,
and this is basically
now here's what we told you folks: we're not going to talk about tax policy,
but we're going to sneak it in. Yeah,
so, okay.
But this is basically it's being sold as a property tax relief measure, but basically what it does is it guts their taxpayer bill of rights, which is a state spending limitation for Colorado.
And you've talked about this a lot in the past. You're a big fan of that Colorado language that they have.
Yeah. And what I'm afraid of is that this is, if it passes, it's going to open the door to increase state spending, and it's not necessarily going to provide property tax relief. So I think it's a lesson for us in Iowa, too, as we look at potentially, if there's future legislation that promises property tax relief in exchange for greater state spending, and I think if that passes, it's going to really kind of turn Tabor into the humble bumble from Rudolph. It's going to take his teeth out, and Tabor's not going to be as effective as it is. And right now, Tabor's been really good at returning money back to Colorado taxpayers and keeping spending in control.
Yeah, as good a language as Colorado has, I don't know that their politics has been particularly friendly to taxpayers there over the last few years. So that would be
Tabor has been slowly watered down.
And this is that's a ballot measure, right? That's a referendum.
Yes.
And so this is your periodic reminder to be thankful that Iowa does not have a ballot referendum, because it should be very hard to write a law and to amend a constitution.
That's right.
And we get to have the benefit of that in Iowa. So, John, I had thought about getting into the caucuses a little bit, but I think we're about out of time.
Okay.
And I want to be able to come back around, maybe even tomorrow, because I want to talk about the Governor Reynolds endorsement of Ron DeSantis in the caucus. That's a big.
It is.
It's a big piece of news. Where are we at with the caucuses? We're going to be talking about that. And some polling numbers for the governor that I think at first glance are a little discouraging, but at the same time, I think we should take some pride in that.
Yes.
So we're going to talk about that as well. And the big one that I want all of you specifically to look forward to is we are going to have our recap of John Fetterman at the Democrat fall party. And there's a lot of good stuff out of that, too. So hopefully tomorrow we can come back with a special edition with all that. So
that'll be fun.
Anyway, any closing thoughts on Election Day?
No, I think it's exciting, and it's I think it's we're going to see some interesting results.
Yep. I agree. Make sure you get out and vote. It's quick. It's easy. You lose a lot of your right to complain if you don't show up and vote. We're going to have a lot of information available at ITR Foundation, taxrelief.org about what happens in these races. It might take us a little while to dig through all the data, but we're going to have a lot of that. But if nothing else, make sure you get out and vote and that your voice gets heard. And with that, that's what we got. So thanks for joining us. Don't forget to like and subscribe and tell your friends. With all of that, we will see you next time on ITR Live.